Shabbat Shalom for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. Uh, we have made it through the Omer, and there's a lot to be said about what I just said. But what I want you to think about is really what we made it through was the season that the Israelites were in which they said, God brought us out here to die. Now, I know some of you, probably in your reactions to the wilderness season, may have indicated that God was not fair or that God had not delivered you or whatever the thing was. But I can assure you that that doesn't necessarily affect the entire the system itself. The In Your Own Light series has been trying to teach you who you really are in authority, in energy, and in consciousness. It has not been intended to replace your theology in terms of a relationship with God. In fact, I will tell you that it should have drawn you closer to God in the sense that He took the time to create an entity who would choose Him. If you're not registering that relational condition, then there are other things going on that have to do with the wilderness season. I can tell you one of the worst times to make life decisions is during the wilderness season. Not that you can just throw life decisions out and wait for the wilderness season to end, but you are under a strong delusion during the wilderness season that things are hopeless, that they are stagnant, that they're never going to end, etc., etc. Now, there are a number of things that you should know about that. I mean, for example, the idea that there are bitter waters, which is meriba, as opposed to uh, as opposed to sweet waters, and the idea that there's no water, no food, and no protection. You are going to tend towards making bad choices. But what you don't understand is what all of this is about. And I will share with you that I don't either. But I'm going to at least show you the dynamic that we can glean from the verses in the Bible, from Torah, from the scriptures, from the prophets, and from the latter writings. All of it together, right? Let's talk a minute about that. Let's talk a minute about what it means to be a writer of the Bible. Some of my first videos that are on this YouTube channel are about the filters that you need to have. But one of the filters that you need to have when you're reading the New Testament is that you need to have an understanding that there is actually a truth present that you cannot get around, and that is the value of Torah, the value of teaching and instruction of God. Now, it's also important for you to understand that the soul of Torah that became flesh and dwelt among us is that energy to begin with, a balance of mercy and justice and sovereignty. Can you imagine a righteous king? Can you imagine that righteous king governs all energies in the universe after the intensification of all power in the universe pours into it? A son, a progeny, a next generation of energies is Yeshua. The reconciliation of that is kind of foreign to our brains because we as Christians were taught that the very purpose of Christ was the cross. And so when we read parables about the kingdom of heaven, we think that it is our asbestos underwear, right? We think that it is our delivery from hell. We think that it is after we die. If that was true, then I promise you, one of the crazy things about it is whatever reward and punishment that are mentioned in Revelation on the other side seem to have some sort of connection to a soul still being present. Meaning what? It's another life. Is it this life? Do we repeat our stay on earth? I'm not necessarily asserting that today. But I propose to you that what we see in the book of Revelation is indicative of an idea that Yeshua's stay here on earth had nothing to do with the cross. And what I mean by that is the cross was the transition point later on, but his stay on earth was significant. Every word he said, every moment of his existence that John said, if we wrote all of the things that he did, they would be contained in a book that would surround, a scroll that would surround the earth. I'm not going to tell you what the circumference of the earth is, but I'm going to tell you that's a really big scroll. So the reason why this is so important is because when we think about instruction, we think about purpose, when we think about anything that pertains to the intensification of all power in the universe, we need to think about the fact that the writers of the Bible held it in sacred reverence. So Paul, who I honestly have a very, very hard time believing that Paul would take upon himself a non-Hebrew Greek name in interest of his transition from a Jewish Pharisaical rabbi to a Messianic Pharisaical rabbi. He claimed to be a Pharisee in the book of Philippians, which consequently, to the best of our knowledge, is the last book that was ever written by him. Last letter. It's also important for you to know that Paul demonstrated an adherence to the law that you have not yet demonstrated. And it's also important for you to know that if Paul gave writings or information about it, that it is probably really, really, really important. Torah plays a role that we have yet to understand because in our minds, the writing of the law and then the traditions of men that became the oral law are burdensome. That's what we're taught as Christians. We're taught that the only thing that matters is the cross. We're also taught that somehow Yeshua supposedly fulfilled the law by keeping the feasts and obeying the law, in all ways tempting but yet not sin. Well, truth be told is that it is possible to keep the law perfectly. Oh yes, those of you who believe that a lifestyle and life choices could not be filtered through the Torah don't understand how easy the Torah is to keep. Now, Yeshua made it difficult. He actually raised the bar on Torah because he said it had to do with the heart, not the actual letter. Paul reiterates this in saying that we serve the Spirit, not the letter. So now, I'm just going to help you understand that if you go through the 613 commandments and you take the time to learn them and understand them, you will see they're not something that you can't do. Now, James makes a statement and says, if you break one of them, you have broken all of them. But what you don't realize is if you keep one of them, you've kept all of them. And what I mean by that is there is an honor being given to heaven if you are just a little bit obedient. Let me explain. In fact, what do you say we go over to the board and draw what I'm saying? Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. And what I want you to think about is that we have, how do I'm going to do this? I think what I'm going to do is I will just illustrate infinite light here. Okay, this represents infinite light. Sorry, those others are where my fingertips accidentally are touching. Okay, that represents infinite light. That represents everything that the intensification of all power in the universe is. I did it that way, and I did it in that system of such a way as to say there is no limitation. I didn't make it square. I didn't make it circle. There should be enough of a randomness to what I am showing you on the board to illustrate the intensification of all power in the universe without limit, without definition. There is no gender. There is no father. There is no mother. There is nothing except infinite power intensifying, which means technically there is one limitation on this board, and that is that it's not animated in such a way that it continues to grow very, very slowly according to our time. But at the core of this infinite light, and really infinity, unfortunately, is an unfortunate description as well, because truth be told, infinity is a number that can be calculated by God, which means it's a limitation, which means there's an end to it, just not one that we can perceive or understand. We use infinity to describe a limitless upper limit, and we use negative infinity to describe a limitless lower limit, if that makes any sense. All right. So now the intensification of all power in the universe needs to somehow be stoked. So let's do this as a concept of desire by illustrating its color here, that there is a pinpoint idea in the middle of the intensification of all power in the universe. That's not a good color. We need a contrasting color. Let's do red. Red and white. Really good for signage. All right. So now we have this pinpoint thought. I want to put this energy that I am into something else. I want to give everything that I have to something else. I want to pour out. I want to have a definition. Well, the result is that there is a intention from the intensification of all power in the universe to create within itself a space that will give it the ability to pour into. And that space is going to be a simple reduction of self, a self-denial, which we're going to represent by just that boundary right there. We're going to use a circle because it basically, for all intents and purposes, the formula for the tangent of a circle divided by infinity results in a curve that has infinite faces. So if we were going to be describing God, we're not going to put him in the box. We're going to put him in a circle, which really isn't all that great of an idea either, except for one simple truth, and that simple truth is that this singular piece of black is the only boundary known to the intensification of all power in the universe. Let me explain. That was the only limitation that it was willing to allow. Now, it's very important that you understand that limitation is actually a communication from the entity that wants that, or that he wants to put his energy into. And that communication is a negation particle. So let me explain this for a second. In Hebrew, which consequently, let me get on a soapbox for just a moment, okay? When the intensification of all power in the universe chose a language to communicate his truth to a people, he chose a lifestyle, a language, and a philosophy. And that lifestyle, language, and philosophy were already established by the people of his creation. That's going to become important here in a minute, but there's something more. It's Hebrew, not Greek. In fact, the Greeks, in Paul's eyes, were considered the antithesis of the Hebrew lifestyle. He often used the word for Greek, which was Helena, to explain the error in the church's behaviors. In fact, Yeshua, at times, in speaking, would describe those who were not circumcised, right, who were not Jewish, as dogs. Now, before you freak out and think that I am trying to create a racial bias of Judaism being superior to Gentiles, you're thinking inaccurately. What I'm trying to do is say that the language that God chose was Hebrew. And the power behind Hebrew is built into the philosophical science of theology with God. What do I mean by that? At the very core of Hebrew grammar is the negation particle. Let me explain. In the Ten Commandments, when it says, "You shall not kill," what it actually says is, "You shall kill no or not." Okay? So I want you to think about the instruction coming as an energy of affirmation and then being negated. Okay? So the way that I could explain this is that in terms of the intensification of all power in the universe, a dialing back of himself, the self-denial or saying no to himself, actually causes 1% darkness to exist, because there cannot be 100% light. If there is 100% light, then it is him and it defeats the purpose. There has to be a minor imperfection, and that singular 1% light is simply just a negation particle. So he says, "I will bestow upon my creation not." That's it. That's the only limitation he ever put upon himself. However, you need to understand that that entire process is all just a single thought. Every single, and then this is important, I want you to think about this. In fact, I'm going to illustrate it for you really quick. Okay? This is a really simple thought. Okay? So what we'll do is we'll use two different colors to represent gender, just really quick. So we'll start with this color green. Oh, wrong pen. There we go. This color green. And this color blue. This represents the primordial mother and father. right? Adam and Eve, if you want. And they end up having two children, which we're going to just represent as the same colors in gender. We'll just go this color green. Oops. Okay. And we will represent this as this color blue for the male. Okay, so every family has two kids. So if we just go ahead and add a dude here, and we go ahead and we add a lady here. Okay. If we were to continue this, then there would be another two, another two, another two, another two, right? So how many do we got down here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 13, 14, 15, 16. So at the 1, 2, 3, fourth generation, there's already 16 people. Okay. So what I want you to think about is the intensification of all power in the universe, which we're going to represent here as a thread of connection. The intensification of all power in the universe thinks about each and every last decision of every last human being and their decisions and their decisions, right? And their decisions, and on and on and on and on. And all of the different possibilities in those decisions are separate dimensions of a single thought. And so on out to, what are we at? 8 billion some people today, and all of their 8 billion thoughts while they're alive. It might be shorter than that. It might be less than that. But what I want you to think about is every single last fork in the road is already thought of out to its minutia by the intensification of all power in the universe as a consciousness. Okay? And so the next principle is that it knows that if it continues to assert, I would like to bestow, that eventually there will be an allowance. Now, when we are working with the bride, it would be easy here to say that since, let's use green. Yep. Since this is actually a vessel of reception, and this is a vessel or intention to bestow, then as soon as this came into existence, let me go to the board. So as soon as the black circle comes into existence, we have something interesting go on, and that is that the vessel of reception becomes a feminine or contractive energy. Instantaneously is contractive because of the black circle. In fact, I'm going to put a red line in the black circle to show contractive. Okay? Meaning there was a dialing back In fact, let me write that on the board. God was dialed back for her. Okay? In the same breath, we need to accept that the moment that there was a feminine principle of reception created through the word no, which was a denial of self by the intensification of all power in the universe, an emptying, as it were, of self in order for something to exist. You need to understand that there was an instantaneous understanding that was still 99% light. I don't have grayscale, or I could really shade this circle with the 99% light. But what I can do is make it a different color. And so I think what I'm going to go ahead and do, just because this particular purple is really nice for the idea, is I'm just going to go ahead and do this and then color all of this in as the 99% light, because it is different than the 100% light. It's missing something, which gives it a desire to receive. However, its first response had to be no. Now we have bestowal. So let's offer some information from the context of bestowal. First of all, the moment that the vessel of reception, in fact, we'll go ahead and label it vessel of reception, right? The bestowal, right, instantaneously becomes masculine in nature. Now let's talk a minute about that before we go any further. The Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, does what? He offers a secret to the universe of people. He says, they are without excuse, because through that which has been made, every single invisible attribute of the divine power and the eternal power and the divine nature of God have been made known. Meaning what? We can look to a female to understand the feminine principle. We can see that there is a design built into her to create life through a insemination, and thereby a receiving in of the masculine principle. And so we can accept that what we're looking at here is the first male and female in a very, 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 very divine, infinite, limitless sense. The only limit that the intensification of all power in the universe has placed upon itself at this point is, quite frankly, just a self-denial. I'm going to allow 1% darkness, and that 1% is simply the word no. Okay? I will bestow not. That's it. So the way that I want you to think about it is, then if we look at the masculine or the male, we can look at some very important attributes, but one of them is that a male is able to inseminate more than one female, and the instinct of the male is to do exactly that. What causes a male to actually become bonded to a female is a very miraculous event, and it is built into Yeshua himself. But what causes a male to desire to put his seed in whatever will receive it is the intensification of all power in the universe. Meaning what? Meaning that original denial is the first act of free will. Now, that means that all, let me make this clear, all of the sovereignty of the intensification of all power in the universe has now been granted to the feminine principle. How so? She can actually tell him no. And what I mean by that is that she actually, in some weird sort of way, technically has authority over him in that sense. Meaning the most powerful entity in the universe is actually the feminine principle. Now, what you need to understand is that does not change the sovereignty of the intensification of all power in the universe. At any given time, you can just say, you know what, I'm tired of this vessel of reception. Goodbye. I'll make a different one. I'll choose a different queen, right? But the principle is that she is able to deny him, and that denying of him is actually a denial of self because she is the intensification of all power in the universe, denying itself. But within that creates the vessel of reception prepared to receive the bestowal, which was the intention in the first place. And the highest authority, this is very important, the highest authority that exists in the universe is the desire to bestow all of the benevolence of itself upon the other, upon an other, something other than itself. It doesn't have to be much different, but it has to be different enough to have the sovereignty and the free will to choose. Now, where this becomes extremely important is in the fact that what we actually have observed here is the bride. However, there's much to come because this particular bride still has so much light that it is influenced by the light. What does that mean? She's not going to say no for very long, is she? Because she is actually him, and he actually knows what he wants. I know that sounds a little bit off the wall, but the way I want you to think about it is more along the lines that this thing is this, and therefore it knows that it actually wants the bestowal. And so that is the first instruction. The truth of Torah, the power behind Torah, the essence of Torah in that single instruction right there, that the intensification of all power in the universe wants only one thing, and that is for whatever exists outside of its 100% light, or should I say inside of its 100% light, will receive. And that's it. She can give nothing to him. And furthermore, not only can she give nothing to him, but the only authority that she actually has to say no in the first place was granted by him. And if he chooses to override that, hey, that's the intensification of all power in the universe. Who's there to question him? Who's there to say, that's unfair? That's actually gender inequality. Good luck with that. Because you have yet, as a human being, to realize the level of actual intensification of power that is producing this realm and this reality and your actual life and quote unquote your inalienable rights. And here's the irony, is that you think that we created those inalienable rights, but you need to go back and read the Constitution. It says there by divine providence. So who do we look to for that energy? Up. But please understand, up is not up in this universe. When I say up, I mean a higher energy, a higher elevation, a higher vibration. Okay. So you understand that this purple represents a problem. Can that purple not be biased? Can that purple actually potentially be quote unquote manipulated by the intensification of all power in the universe? Yes. Because why? Because 99% of it is still him. Only 1%, and that is that negation particle, has actually created a vessel to receive something. Which means what? We need more influence of the negation particle. We need there to actually be a greater no. And if there's a greater no, then there's a greater opportunity for it to choose on its own. Which means what? We would need to go to at least, let me see, what do I want to do here? I think what I'm going to do, see if I can capture it all. Did I get it? I did. Okay. That's what I want to do. Okay. So in principle, then, we understand, oh, you know what? I need to complete these attributes real quick because they're going to become important later on. So we have the masculine, and then, of course, I'm going to do the opposite of contractive, and I'm going to use green to represent that. This green. Yeah, we can get away with this. Expansive. And it's expansive to the extent that there is no limit beyond that negation particle. Expansive, in which we can safely place some attributes here, and we'll go ahead and say, as it is masculine and expansive, we'll go ahead and use this same blue and put it here. Whoops. God is not, wow, just a horrible writing today, is not dialed back in any way. Okay. So now when we talk about this, then we have to accept that the next level of this creative process would require there to be a vessel not influenced by the intensification of all power in such a way that it has to be a minimum amount. And I'm going to show you that minimum amount. That minimum amount is now going to be half and half. Let's see how I'm going to do this. Let's just do it like this. Now we could argue that what we're experiencing here is still not enough, but we're not there yet. We just need to accept that it has to be exactly half and half for her to not be biased. Why? Because the more she is like her husband, as it were, she is going to side with him and therefore receive without the true information of the negation particle. Now, let me explain the power behind this. The power behind this is that if she truly doesn't receive according to her heart's desire to receive, then he can't legitimately give her all that she has or all that he intends to give her, because again, it has to be non-biased, because his first intention was, I want to bestow all that I have upon an other who chooses to receive, who chooses me. And you know what? We see this actually within the human condition. We have the quote unquote gold diggers. Now, before you think that I have a bias against women because I bring up some of their darknesses and their nature, you are mistaken. Most people who know me will know that I presume that there is more equality present in gender than there is inequality, but this singular inequality has to be honored, and if it is not, then there is consequences from the universe. And it is throughout the books, not just the Bible, that there is a consequence for allowing the feminine principle to override the masculine when the masculine has sovereignty. And I will get to that. Okay, so we could presume that this is enough, but the truth be told is it actually has to be a little bit less. So let's illustrate that, because you would think that this would be sufficient. You would think that a complete balance of the negation particle and the masculine assertion would be sufficient for her to make a decision. But the truth be told is it actually has to be less than that, because if there's even a 50-50, she's still not choosing on her own, which means it has to be less than a 50-50. So then our next illustration, which consequently means I probably have to move this again, which means some of your notes are going to get very small. The next principle means that there has to be, again, something going on. And what you need to know is that something that's going on is actually beautiful. It's amazing what the intensification of all power in the universe is doing here, okay? But the next one, let's go here. The next one actually is just a little bit more than half. Okay? Because now the negation particle is overriding the bias of the original entity. Where this becomes absolutely important is in the idea that there is actually a waning of light that's going on, and there's a waxing of darkness. And that is going to become absolutely important here in a moment. Because what I would like for you to really understand is that this process is still not enough. Even though there's now 49% light and 51% darkness, and in that sense, there is a 51% influence upon the company, so to speak, through the darkness having ownership. And what I mean by that is that it is the controlling power, right? It is the controlling energy, the negation particle, the rebellion, the rebelliousness, the defiance is actually still not enough, because that other 49% light has a strength to resist. Okay? A strength to resist. And so as a result of that, we can accept that until there is sufficient enough darkness to say that there is only a single speck of light in the universe, then that light could potentially choose to receive. You understand why? Because any influence from the intensification of all power in the universe results in a bias, which means there's a point in time where the I has to be the last 1% light. So then if that's the case, we will dial it back one more time, okay? And that last time, and I'll go ahead and label these so that we can understand the principle that's occurring here. And please understand, this isn't necessarily how this process occurred, but it is the information of the process that's more important. So this is number 1. This is number 2. This is number 3. This is number 4. And finally, when we get to number 5, we have something very, very special and very powerful going on. And go ahead and erase that. All right, now for the grand finale. You could probably stop the video after this, but there's so much more information you're going to miss. You know what's coming. And I'm just going to go ahead and do some labeling here real quick. This, of course, is 50, 50. This is 51, 49. This is 1 to 99. Now, let me explain to you what that means. That means that she is 100% influenced by her sovereignty of rebellion and 1% influenced by the instruction that the intensification of all power in the universe began with, that I have a desire to bestow all of my benevolence upon an other. And so there's a singular instruction being passed down: receive. That's it. There is no longer any influence from the intensification of all power in the universe except a request, a singular word: receive. Okay? A singular word: receive. Now, this becomes extremely important and extremely powerful because now she has the ability to 100% rebel against him, which would consequently result in a place or a realm that does not have any light. And she can choose that. Okay? She can choose that. But that 1% request is still him. And everything that is embodied within him is actually within her as that single percent. Now we come to what? We come to the powerful truth our reality. And you see that why it is such a powerful choice now. You see why he went through all the trouble to dial back, denial self, continue to say, okay, let me pull back a little bit more because I want her to choose. I don't want, listen, now I can complete my gold diggers thought process here where a woman sees a man's money and entices him and induces him to complete a transaction of marriage with him, and therefore she can receive that money. Or perhaps it's his prestige and power as a politician or whatever, or perhaps it is the celebrity of him, how beautiful he is to everyone else, and now he's hers. The wrong reasons to choose a husband, right? But what is the right reason? Well, according to this process, the right reason would be number one, to receive, but number two, to allow him the sovereignty afforded him from the intensification of all power in the universe, who is him. Now, before you get in your mind or have an idea in your heart that the black circle is feminine, you need to think differently. The purple vessel is feminine. The black circle is the negation. The black circle is the rebellion. The black circle is the part that has to have a denial of God, denying himself. Now, there is something very powerful about what I just said when you think about Yeshua. When you think about Jesus Christ, it says that he left the throne, right? He left the throne and took on the form of man. So then what is Yeshua? Well, let me just go ahead and illustrate it for you so that you can really get your head wrapped around it, because there's really no other way to really do this. I'm going to go ahead and instead of reducing this yet again, I'm just going to get rid of our reality and we'll kind of put it back as smaller really quick here. No. So you need to understand that what needed to happen here is there needed to be a full choice afforded to us. And so now what we'll do is we'll illustrate that through one last contraction that could have only be done by the intensification of all power in the universe, could not have been done by the bride, could only have been done by the groom as one last final self-denial. And now you can understand the level of the actual quote unquote sacrifice, because there is only one definition for this place. Only one. That's how much he emptied himself. She could not contract. Let me explain something to you. Whoops. Okay, first, here, look at that on the board. See? Yeshua, right? I was standing in front of it. Sorry. That is the ultimate denial of self. You see, she could not contract again because there was no vessel for her to pour into, because there was no light to be received, because she was the last of the light. But see, within that is a microcosmic element, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the way that I want you to think about this and the way that your mind needs to adjust is that Yeshua made it possible for any light that is in excess to pour into him, whether it be a positive or negative charged energy. And what's interesting about that is all that did was give an opportunity for her to be elevated in her position, where no matter what she did, she could not contract to this. She could not deny herself to darkness. But he could, and he did. Now, where this becomes so important is it means that the influence upon her of rebellion has an answer in the fact that he got under her. He got under the bride who needed to be divorced because of her adultery. You get that? You understand how he got under us all? What he actually did? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. And the way that I want you to think about this is that we are the only light of the world. Yeshua told us this when he became flesh and dwelt among men. He became flesh and dwelt among men. Now, am I saying that Yeshua is God? No more than you are. The divinity of Yeshua is actually contained within your heart and your system of existence, because you are just a mirror of the intensification of all power in the universe. It's just, you need to understand there are concealments that prevent you from knowing how big you really are. And that's on your behalf, because if you did know, you're going to do one of two things. Either you're going to fall into such a deep entitlement that you try to rule the entire system, which is what we call Hasatan, or you're going to deconstruct as a result of an understanding that you're not him and you can never be him. Both of those are concealed. Are we Hasatan? Yes, of course we are. Look at all this. We are that vessel. And so that 99% light, it represents everything that you do wrong, represents everything that is against Torah. The wrath of God is poured out from heaven upon those who suppress the truth, because they exchanged the worship of the creation for the worship of the Creator. And they are without excuse because of what? Because of that which has been made is proof of the invisible attributes of his divine nature and his eternal power. In other words, we are his divine nature and eternal power, visible to everything else around us, proof that we are the light. He told a people who did not believe in him as the Messiah, you are the light of the world. And if you think that he was just talking to Jews there, you need to understand he was trying to explain it to a people who didn't believe in him. Were the Gentiles present in the crowd? That doesn't matter. In fact, let me break your brains for a second. Technically speaking, I am a Hebrew rabbi, not a Jewish rabbi. The reason I say this is because the ancient Hebrew nomadic lifestyle and or the ancient Hebrew culture and or the ancient Hebrew philosophy are not contained within Judaism per se, except in certain little excerpts here and there. Judaism has become an entirely separate thing. Do they maintain the feast? Sure, but not how we do. Do they understand the Torah? Sure, but not how we do. Because they deny one singular element that is absolutely necessary in any philosophy of theology. That Yeshua got under us so that we would be elevated. And it says, he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God, which is what? An equal distributor of abundance. What abundance? That right there. The bestowal. The benevolence. 100% benevolence, not 100% light, but 100% benevolence is poured out from heaven upon those who what? Who accepted him, and to those who accepted him, when he came unto his own, to those who accepted him, he gave them rights to become sons of God. Now you see why this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and really there's 6 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what you really need to understand is that you are higher than Yeshua. That's why he said, greater things would you do. That's why he said that. So now you understand that the reason why we exist is to choose with absolute bias towards the negation particle. 99% of us wants to say no, and only 1% of us is willing to say yes, and that 1% of us is actually the part of us that receives the Torah instruction from God to receive. But here's the power behind it. Let me show you. Contained within the reality of our existence is something called a tabernacle, a tent, as it were. And that particular tent just so happens to be accessible through a door. And that tent has contained within it what? Provision, protection, and instruction. What is the instruction? What is the protection? What is the provision? What is provision, protection, instruction within the tent? For the for the vessel of reception. For the vessel of reception, what is it? To receive. That's it. Not to give, not to create, not to do anything else but receive. I want you to think about how hard it actually is to accept that you actually cannot provide for yourself. I want you to think about what it takes for your brain to understand that. Because since the garden, Adam has believed that it is through the sweat of his brow he will eat his bread. But he did not understand that in its greatest scheme. Its greatest scheme is that's what Adam believed about himself. And Yahweh just granted it. Because Adam was sovereign. God could not come in and just start making rules in the garden. Adam had dominion over the garden. Oh, you're not ready for that one. And so what's crazy about it is that when he does make a rule, Adam defaults to the negation particle because he has the right to, the sovereignty to. However, the intensification of all power in the universe was going to intervene between mercy and justice with sovereignty and say, okay, since you created the reality of what you believe this to be as good and evil, I'm going to grant your belief about your nakedness. Get out of my garden. Since you want to be inferior, I will be superior, and therefore get out of my garden. Don't touch that tree. And he makes it impossible for Adam to go through with the flaming sword, right? But truth be told, it is Adam's sovereignty that causes Adam to have to eat by the sweat of his brow. Yahweh's just granting him his nakedness. And what you need to know is that becomes very powerful in your reality building, but that's not what we're here about today. What we're here about today is not about the effect, but the cause. And the cause is what the bride actually has it as her power. With the husband getting underneath her and elevating her to the authority, energy, and consciousness that she actually is supposed to be in this realm, he then ultimately, having gone all the way down, now has all authority and power. What does he tell his disciples before he leaves this earth? All power and authority have been granted to me in heaven and on earth. Meaning what? I've been given it all. And I was given it all because of reciprocation, because I humbled myself even to the death of the cross when I did nothing wrong. And therefore, I got under you. And since I got under you, I get everything. But I now give it back to you, my bride. Go do what it is that I created you to do. And now here's the power behind this. Does the bride receive her authority from her husband? Sure. But look at the power that he got. He went under her and therefore was elevated high above her and then granted to her that same authority. He gave the bride back her scepter that she had lost through the game of trying to contract. And whatever's here is now under the absolute command of Yeshua. But what you need to know is whatever's here can still be drawn up because of her darkness. You have no idea the things we draw up from below, where there is no vibration. Now, it is very important for you to understand then that what we are made up of is 99% Satan and 1% Yahweh. Now you should probably understand the level of wisdom in Job. And now you can understand how reciprocation works better because of your choices. So, what does the 99% give us? It gives us absolute sovereignty to choose. Whereas before, even if there was 2% light, which would have been more like the Yesod level or the cement mixing level of reality and not the actual physical form of reality, or what we would call the realm of emanation versus the realm of formation, I can tell you is absolutely about the fact that if it was even 2%, she would have a 1% bias, which could make it still not just. Well, who is asking for this justice? Who's asking for her to be so biased towards darkness that if she chooses, it would be a miracle, and that miracle becomes the beauty of the bride and the bridegroom? Who says that? Who makes that accusation that it's not fair unless? It's interesting because the truth be told is actually she is the one who says, I don't know, I still feel like there's a little bit of bias here. Why don't you maybe be a little bit poorer? Maybe you could, maybe we'll say that I don't really want to look at your beauty. I don't want to look at your prestige. I don't want to look at your wealth. I just want the you, the internal you. And what he did is he granted the internal him as her so she could experience him. You see, here's the crazy part about it, and a lot of people don't understand this element of theology. The intensification of all power in the universe stuffed himself into a human so that he could experience the bride. And then he granted the bride the experience of his divine nature and eternal power. You want proof of that? Okay. Because I'm sure some of you are like, I don't know, that doesn't sound right. And I could tell you, there was a time when I believed that as well, but I'm telling you, a scripture stumped me. There was a verse in the Bible that stumped me, that caught me up so. In fact, I'm going to show you it in the way that I ended up reading it, because here's the thing. I read the New Testament in one sitting, and when I did, I don't know whether it was a mistake or not, but I can tell you I was never the same ever again. Because when I read it in one sitting with the filters that are supposed to be in place as a result of what is communicated from the quote unquote Old Testament, if you carry it into the New Testament, the values of it, and then you observe the writers of it doing the things, your head will explode. Okay? All right, here we go. Let's do the journey just real quick here. So here I am reading Romans chapter 1. And I'll share something with you. I was a part of a Bible discipleship program that required you to memorize Romans 6 and potentially Romans 7 so that you could understand better the choice that we were supposed to make. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Most certainly not, or God forbid. For how shall we who died to sin live any longer in it, right? Well, as I began to examine it, it became necessary that if I was going to memorize 6 and 7, that I should probably memorize 5. Truth is that there's important information in 4, and then 3. And then finally, it became necessary to memorize 1 and 2 to really get the grasp of 3. Well, then I decided that I should add 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 to the list. Well, we really need 13. Let every soul be subject to the governing authority, for there is no authority except from God. And so I stopped at 13, and I could quote 1 through 13. But the problem is that when I encountered verse 19, somebody reached out to me and grabbed my chin and said, "What is truth?" Because why? Truth is a person. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, if truth is a person, then that person has a soul. Truth has a soul. And boy, I tell you what, this was way before a depth of Torah that I understand now, because Torah has a soul. That soul is Yeshua. But what's powerful about it is all that soul is a balance between mercy, justice, and the sovereignty of God. And that governs all other energies in the universe, because he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we may become the righteousness of God. He got under it all. Okay? Okay. So sorry, but my truth that I understood at that moment was Torah. So it says in Romans chapter 1 verse 18, for God does not overlook sin, and the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who in their wickedness suppress the truth and stifle the truth. Oof. Okay. And so if that be true, then I probably need to understand what truth is so that I am not under the wrath of God. That's what my brain did. And then it says, because that which is known about God is evident within them in their consciousness, for God made it evident to them. Oh, here we go. For ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through his workmanship. All creation, the wonderful things that he has made, so that they who fail to believe and trust in him are without excuse and without defense. Mind blown. What I need to know about my God is actually in that which has been. I did not know then what I was about to get myself into, because a good, maybe, I don't know, hour later, because the epistles are pretty short. An hour later, I arrived at this. For his divine power has bestowed on us absolutely everything necessary for a dynamic spiritual life and godliness through true and personal knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. For by these he has bestowed on us his precious and magnificent promises of inexpressible value, so that by them you may escape the immoral freedom that is in the world because of the disreputable desire, and become sharers of the divine nature. There's the eternal power. There's the divine nature. Sorry. There we go. I'll read it to you again. For his divine power has bestowed upon us absolutely everything for a dynamic spiritual life and godliness through true and personal knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. For by these he has bestowed on us his precious and magnificent promises of inexpressible value, so that by them you may escape from the immoral freedom that is in the world because of disreputable desire. That would be the darkness, and become sharers of the divine nature. What divine nature? 1% light. Being what? An instruction. What instruction? Receive. Receive what? Provision, protection, and instruction. We have a hard time receiving provision because we think that we actually own, or we actually earn what we have. But that's not what Yeshua says. In fact, that is not what the Bible communicates. What about protection? I'm actually going to get under some people's skin here. But truth be told, even though that we have an inalienable right to bear arms in order to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government, who really is your protection? What really is your protection? And from what? What is you actually being protected from? Those are questions you should probably ask yourself. And then finally, instruction. What is the instruction to receive? But there's more, right? There's wisdom on how to deal with life. What is wisdom? All wisdom is an understanding of how. That's it. That's all wisdom is a way of proceeding forward from the knowledge that you've been given. That's all wisdom is. Wisdom, understanding, knowledge, all of that. Those are the essences of creation, are contained within the thought process of the what and the what, the what and the why, the who and the how, and then for us finite beings, the where and the when. And those are powerful. I mean, contained even within the law itself. So let's talk a minute about the law of the land. The law of the land presumes a ens legis, or a fictitious person. And that fictitious person now is granted all rights and equality. And then it is determined what would it cause that fictitious person to fall under the auspices of being or of due process of law that would remove these inalienable rights. What would they have to do? And then we come up with elements. And one of the elements is, right, mens rea, I am guilty, right? Or mea culpa, right? An acceptance or a presumption of guilt by a jury of your peers. But what's interesting about it is that's the only time that this fictitious person could be denied due process of law. But what is required? A date, right? And a location. There has to be the elements of intention, a date, and an action. Sorry, not a location, an action. Location isn't necessarily relevant. But my point is even the law itself in our realm requires there to be a timestamp on a crime in order for a crime to be documentable. In fact, there are many, many, many cases that have been overturned as a result of the fact that they could not nail down a time. And there have been many attempts to manipulate that and have been overridden by the Supreme Court. You have to have a time. You have to have a date. So it is in our realm that time and location are relevant in height, width, depth, time. We need a spatial location and we need a time, we need a place in the timeline of our existence, but not so for the rest. So this understanding, this wisdom that I am explaining here is going to have its relevance in our imperfection. Why? Because somewhere along the lines, you're going to have to accept that instruction is actually the path to the solution from the problem. Remember, I said we're going to talk about cause and effects today. Today, we're talking about cause. We're not talking about the consequences of all this. We're talking about the process itself, because what we need to understand is what's about to happen in the universe. You see, for those of you who actually honored the sighting of the new moon when the barley was Aviv and are not following a constructed mathematical calculation calendar, know that tomorrow is Shavuot. Tomorrow is Pentecost. Let me illustrate for you what I mean. Okay. So a lot of you already know this timeline very well, but you know that every time that I put it on the board, you get something new from it. It's a simple one, isn't it? It's a simple one to remember. It's an easy one to illustrate, to show others, right? It is very, very simple. It consists of an ebb and flow. Okay? Simple enough. What are these? You guys know what they are. Whoa, there's some tribal for you. Passover. Pentecost. Tabernacles. What else is here? What else do we know? What other wisdom is contained in all of this? Oops. Just going to keep going with this. I know I'm actually being silent, but you can see what's developing here. Okay, let's see. What else do we need? We need sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. Okay. And we need currencies. So we need expansive, contractive, balanced, expansive, contractive, balanced. Okay. And then we need a tangent here and a tangent here. And we're going to call this wilderness, as you know. Some people are new. Wilderness. I don't want to negate those who don't know this. Wilderness. This one is golden calf. Okay. Now, there is a principle between this right here, this wilderness dip, as it were, and this right here. That right there is this right here. And what I mean by that is that there is an opportunity within the wilderness season to take it differently. But let's recap the wilderness season in one single scripture. In fact, I'm going to put it actually up on the board and put it as part of this labeling system for this system that we now know so well. A system that you should not be ignorant of unless you are new. That is, that this is I think I did that backwards. Did I do it backwards again? Let me look here real quick. This is just one spelling I don't want to get off. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3 is the essence of the wilderness season. Let's read it together in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. He humbled you and allowed you to be hungry and fed you with manna, a substance which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, so that he might make you understand by personal experience that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. Back to our provision, protection, and instruction. What is the wilderness season designed to show you? You cannot provide for yourself, you cannot protect yourself, and you cannot instruct yourself. Which means what? You have to receive. And if you have to receive, then you need to accept the sovereignty of the husband. You cannot continue to exist without receiving. The birth rate, if we just take this literally, if we look from the perspective of the sustainable birth rate of a human species, we need to accept that that human species is only sustainable through a certain amount of actual births. That's the result of a female receiving. It's all there, written in front of you. If they took away the Bible, we would be able to find it in two places, in our fellow man and in the sky. We won't discuss the sky today. We're discussing fellow man. But during the wilderness season, okay, let's see how I can explain this. When the singular thought of existence came into existence and was thought out to minutia, it became clear that the vessels would blame themselves and then would refuse the light. So there needed to be a solution, and that solution was an intervention that was a combination of mercy and justice and sovereignty poured into a bride-like entity who could choose, and then the unspeakable would happen. Remember, he said, "You do not kill me. I lay down my life." The contraction that occurred in Yeshua was the final answer to the ability for the bride to blame herself and therefore not receive the light. She would be so caught up in the guilt of the 99% darkness and the fact that she could not attain to the light that she so desired, that there would actually be one final contraction and she would cease to exist. And so the answer was a lamb slain from the foundations of the earth. And that lamb being slain from the foundations of the earth activated something within the universe that now is at the core of every galaxy, and it's a fountain of light that is a symbol of the one single process of he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God, and in him we live and move and have our being. All things were created by him and for him, and nothing exists without him. Light of Passover. The resurrection. The moment when Passover activates that death, that moment of getting under all of creation and elevating the bride back to her position because she was trying to contract into darkness, becomes the resurrection. And the resurrection is actually a bookend. There's a resurrection on one side and there's a resurrection on the other side, and that resurrection on the other side is the counting of Omer, and therefore the resurrection is an elevation of all things. Now you see the power behind the wilderness season. It gets under everything. The hunger is actually the contractive energy that draws the answer. Manna was coming. What was manna? Total provision. He led them into a wilderness where they could not have a livelihood by which to provide their bread. Remember what he told Adam. You, by the sweat of your brow, you eat your bread. What sweat of the brow are they going to activate in the wilderness? None. And so what he does is he gives us an opportunity through a concealment, which I'll illustrate with, say, I don't know, let's see. Let's illustrate the concealment with purple, or I mean with a magenta here real quick. And I'm going to do it like this. There is a concealment on each side of the light of Passover to where the wilderness is completely dark, except for our choice to be the light. And in that process, what is he actually doing for you? What is actually happening when it says in verse 3, he humbled you and allowed you to be hungry and fed you with manna, a substance which you did not know, nor your fathers know, so that he might make you understand by personal experience that man does not live by bread alone. Wait a minute. Didn't he tell Adam? By the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread. So who was he granting that to? He was granting that to Hasatan. Who was Hasatan? Adam's head. Adam needed an answer for his sin. And he could not accept the light of Passover. He could not accept Yeshua because he felt so guilty. But he also was not allowed to contract because Yeshua was the last contraction. And so since he wasn't allowed to contract, it became completely important for him to have a way in which to do things. And so Yahweh says, by the sweat of your brow, you eat your bread. But then when he also says, cursed is the ground. But then after the flood, he says, I will no longer curse the ground for Adam's sake. And so here we are now in the wilderness where they cannot toil, nor can they sow. All they can do is just sit there and die. And down comes the manna as a result of a contraction. And so this whole thing is a contraction. This whole thing is an expansion. We'll get into that. But this whole thing is about what the bride needs to know about herself. Because remember, and this is important, Passover is the Shidduchim. Passover is the Shidduchim. And for those of you who do not know what the Shidduchim is, it is the matchmaking. And for those of you who do not know what Pentecost is, it is called the Erusin. I always do that every time. Try to spell Europe. Erusin, which is what? The betrothal. And then finally, we have the Nicene, which is what? The ratification. Why is that purple? Ratification of the covenant. Now let me explain. If the season of Passover leading to Pentecost is the Shidokim, then it is about the bride appearing beautiful enough to draw the gaze of the groom in order to initiate the betrothal process. So what did the intensification of all power in the universe grant to this special entity? An opportunity to show herself to be beautiful. But how? By believing that she can and believing that she is beautiful. You see, the wilderness season will expose your blemishes. It will. But what do we do with blemishes as women when we feel like we are not pretty enough or presentable enough? We cover it, right? Well, that's what's interesting about this contraction is all energy that would be presented at Pentecost is actually taken away. And she beautifies herself through the counting of the Omer. She looks at the Omer and chooses to elevate this world. Do you know that in the realm of mysticism, that there isn't a more important time with them, Kabbalists, other mystics from other groups view this time as being the single most important time for humans to choose to do the right thing, because there is an elevation occurring. Now, if you buy into, say, Lorianic Kabbalah, and you believe that you have to elevate the sparks in order for the quote-unquote bride to be united with her husband, you don't understand the contraction. But if you just accept the context that the contraction is drawing an answer, but that answer is actually earned by the bride by her beautification, because what she does is she looks in the mirror, which is what? The mirror of the invisible attributes of God that are contained within his divine nature, which we can participate according to 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. And his eternal power, again, 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. In such a way as to really understand that she can choose to actually be that 1% light by receiving the light, wielding it, by showing it to those who cannot perceive the light, who think that God brought them out into the wilderness to die. What an interesting thing. An interesting thing that, truth be told, is you go into a state of miserable circumstances to help those who don't understand the circumstances to feel better. Doesn't say you will feel better, but it says you can help those who are in the circumstances to feel better. Psalm 95, I believe it is, says, if today you hear his voice, the voice of what? The 49 energies, do not harden your heart as in the days of the wilderness, right? Interesting stuff in scripture, isn't it? This is like the waters of Meribah to me, where I was angry with that generation for 40 years. What generation? What generation passed in the wilderness, died in the wilderness, never went into the promised land, never elevated? The generation who said God brought us out here into the wilderness to die. He says, I was angry with that generation for 40 years. Who? The ones who were at Meribah. The ones who said God brought us out here in the wilderness to die and experienced water from the rock. Oh man, if you could get this, if you could understand that this is all about the Omer and the elevation and all of the stuff that's built into this right here. I can tell you right now, there are two diagrams that if you have not memorized by now, need to, and that's the cycle of Israel and the cycle of the feast days. You need to grasp the level of this thing. You need to grasp the harmony of the wilderness season. Because truth be told, is what's happening is the bride is drawing the gaze by choosing the light. In a time when 99% darkness is influencing her to be rebellious, to be hateful, to be defiant, to be caught up in the moment of anguish that she's not sovereign, and therefore the decision that she makes to receive, she doesn't want it. She doesn't want the light. And so she dies in the wilderness. Or she chooses the light, beautifies herself, becomes radiant with the light, and thereby draws the gaze of the groom, who now is going to call her into betrothal, is going to draw her into Pentecost. That 50th day of the Omer is the betrothal. What betrothal? That if you will obey me, I will be your God and you will be my people. You will be a holy nation, a chosen generation, right? And a royal priesthood, a peculiar people, as it were. And let me explain to you the understanding there. In Exodus chapter 19, in the third month after the children of Israel had left the land of Egypt, in the third month, y'all, it's the third month. You get it? Okay, let's read it. In the third month after the children of Israel had left the land of Egypt, the very same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. When they moved out from Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and they camped there. Israel camped at the base of the mountain of Sinai. Moshe went up to God on the mountain, and Yahweh called to him from the mountain, saying, say this to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites. Oh, if you understood the difference between the house of Jacob and the Israelites. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will in fact obey my voice and keep my covenant agreement, then you shall be my own special possession and treasure from among all peoples of the world, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation set apart for my purpose. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites. What is that? The betrothal. Let me explain. When a Shadchan, a matchmaker, finally negotiates the dowry or the cost of the bride's father losing her, not only as an asset to the family business, but the relationship of losing her out of the family. So then, after that negotiation is taken care of and the cost is agreed upon, the groom then proposes what he will do on behalf of her to be a husband. After that promise is made, she is given a cup, and that cup contains wine. And if she chooses to consume that wine, then she accepts the terms of the covenant. Now, what she will grant to him is outlined in Torah, and what he will grant to her is outlined in Torah. However, the context is the betrothal. And the idea is that after the betrothal, she can no longer show her beauty to any other entity. And if she drinks that cup, she agrees to wait for him to prepare a place for her. Now, that feast day, that cycle that happens once a year after the counting of the Omer is tomorrow. Now, it is imperative for you to understand some of the things contained within that feast day in order to really grasp the level of everything that's going on. But the biggest thing I want you to know is a balance has been brought to the universe. Let me explain. Okay, first and foremost, I want to tell you that this right here, in fact, let me go to the board for just a minute so that you can see it. This section right here is earned. Let's talk a minute about this for a minute, because I think that the moment that I use the word earned, people immediately want to say that that I am contextually identifying that you could earn your salvation or that you could earn the merit of blessing. It is one of the biggest areas of messianic apologetics where I will have a Christian for lunch is in the realm of merit, because I have made sure to the best of my ability and within the idea that it is the highest intention to communicate in every single last sermon I have preached since November 17th of 2000 to say he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us that we might become the righteousness of God. You need to understand your identity is not earned, and therefore your position in the kingdom of heaven is not earned. It is merited through Yeshua's behavior, which was to get under us. But I want you to think about how you teach your children about money and allowance. So, first of all, let me ask this. If your child does not obey you or do their chores or be a responsible part of the family, are you going to not feed them? Don't get me wrong, it might go to bed without dinner, but are you going to not provide for them? Oh, let's take it a step further. If your teenage child is completely indifferent to you, treats you like you are the help, and on top of that, does not demonstrate an affectionate connection to you any longer, are you not going to protect them? Let's take it a step further. What if they refuse to listen to the rules and they refuse to obey? Are you not going to instruct them? You're going to give all of those things freely. But if they do their chores, they get an allowance. So let's look at it that way, that this are your chores. Okay? So let's talk about what's actually happening there. So this ebb and flow is the reaping season. Reaping from what? The sowing season. The sowing season has its own merits and its own failures and its own weirdness that I kind of completely don't even really understand. But I do know that all of the feast days are contained within the harvest season. Therefore, if we're supernaturally imposing information upon an agricultural calendar, then the sowing season has its spiritual ramifications. Well, guess what? During the wilderness season, you are given an opportunity to unseat the negative reapings. Remember what Paul said, God will not be mocked. You will reap what you sow. And then in another place it says in that same book that if you sow to the flesh, you will reap corruption. That's this dip, right? But if you sow to the spirit, if you sow to the spirit, you will reap, right? Oh, we never drew the spirit up there, did we? Let me go ahead and do that real quick. If you sow to the Spirit, you will reap everlasting life. And according to Yeshua, everlasting life is knowing God. And according to knowing God is how we partake in the divine nature and eternal power, which are the invisible attributes of God that are made known through that which has been created, so that they are without excuse. Who? Those who suppress the truth. Who's the truth? A person. What person? Yeshua, who was what? Slain from the foundations of the earth, got under everything in order for us to be elevated so that we can do things like this and sovereignly affect the universe. Do you know that the golden calf season is accompanied as the dates in which the Holocaust, the destruction of the temple, and other horrible times for the Jews has occurred? And do you know what the rabbis surmise? That he put it in that season so there would never be a season of rejoicing during the season of the golden calf. There would always be a time of mourning. There would always be a sadness. There would always be a cloud over the sunlight or over the light of that season, so that we would always remember. That's what the rabbis say. So if that be true of this season, then what be true of this season? That the intensification of all power in the universe gave an opportunity for us to earn the light. But guess what? If you've earned it, you get to keep it, which makes the bride beautiful. Now, a lot is going to happen as the golden calf season ensues, because what do we know? The bride falls asleep. How do we know? Because Yom Teruah, the feast day of Yom Teruah, which is probably about right here in the timeline before Tabernacles, is an awakening of the bride, which you can read in Daniel chapter 12. Now, here is the principle then that you need to grasp, okay? And that is that this beautification draws the gaze and an invitation is given. And if she takes that cup, then she commits to the information in Exodus 19. Let's read it again. You shall be my own special possession and treasure. What is that? That is technically the Greek or the Hebrew of the Greek that says, you are a peculiar people. That's right. Jumping into our same guy, right? Our same guy that said, who gave us the easy button. We've been given everything that pertains to life and godliness. Also, in his first letter, communicated to, let me see if I can find it here. Where did that? Thought it was in 5, but it's not in 5. First Peter, though, but specifically, we're going to be looking at where it says you are a peculiar people. Here we go. I think this is probably it right here. Let's see. There it is. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a consecrated nation, a special people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies, the wonderful deeds, and the virtues and perfections of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Oh, if you could get the gist of, or I'm sorry, if you could grasp the magnitude, not the gist, if you could grasp the magnitude of what Peter just said, in light of Exodus chapter 19. This is not about Gentiles and Jews. I'm going to blow your mind. And I said I was going to do this earlier, but I'll go ahead and do it now. And the reason I am is because I really want to get your head wrapped around something. I want to ask a very important question. According to Romans chapter 2, we get the definition of a Jew, okay? Romans chapter 2, looking at verse, you know what? I think what I'll do is look at verse 13. For it is not those who merely hear the law as it is read aloud who are just or righteous before God, but it is those who actually obey the law who will be justified or pronounced free of guilt of sin and declared acceptable to him. When Gentiles who do not have the law, since it was given to only to Jews, do instinctively the things of the law required, guided by their conscience, they are a law to themselves, though they do not have the law. They show that the essential requirements of the law are written in their hearts, and their conscience, their sense of right and wrong, their moral choices bearing witness, and their thoughts alternately accusing them or perhaps defending them. On that day when my gospel proclaims God will judge the secrets of all hidden thoughts and concealed sins of men through Jesus Christ. But if you bear the name Jew and rely on the law for your salvation and boast in your special relationship to God, and if you claim to know his will and approve the things that are essential or have a sense of what is excellent based on your instruction from the law, and if you are confident that you are a qualified guide to the blind, those untaught in theology, a light to those who are in darkness, interesting choice of words, Paul, and that you are a corrector of the foolish, a teacher of the spiritually childish, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and of the truth, then you who teach others, do you not teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, do you steal in ways that are discreet, but just as sinful? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who detest idols, do you rob pagan temples of valuable idols and offerings? You who boast in the law, do you repeatedly dishonor God by breaking the law? For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, just as it is written in Scripture. Circumcision, the sign of the covenant of Abraham. I love the Amplified Bible when it says that. Is indeed the value if you practice the law. But if you habitually break the law, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. It is meaningless in God's sight. So if the uncircumcised man keeps the requirements of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded by God as circumcision? then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the spirit of the law will judge you, who even though you have written code and circumcision, break the law. For it is not a real Jew who is one outwardly, or is true circumcision something external and physical, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and true circumcision is circumcision of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the fulfillment of the letter of the law. His praise is not from men, but from God. Why did I read you all that? Because I want you to see that a Gentile is identified as somebody who is not Jewish, who is not circumcised. That was Paul's definition. He was one good rabbi. He was good at what he did when he interpreted Torah. And so if that be true, then we need to accept that a Gentile is one who is not circumcised, and a Gentile is one who is not obedient to Torah. Then you need to understand, if the Torah is coming down from heaven to men from the sovereignty of intervention between the mercy and judgment of God, and is granted to Yeshua as a result of the Lamb being slain from the foundations of the earth, then we can accept by default then that God is actually the origin of Torah, then he is the embodiment of Torah, then we can accept that he is not a Jewish God. We can accept that Judaism originates from the Torah, which means what? He's the God of all. And if he's the God of all, then this is available to all. And if he's the God of all, then we need to accept that the bride is not Jewish. However, the Jews preserved the traditions and the writings of Torah. And they gave us this. They gave us an opportunity to count Omer. They gave us an opportunity because they preserved Torah. In fact, it says, Judah is my lawgiver, right? It says that Judah would preserve Torah, that there would be a remnant of Israel that would preserve Torah. I have reserved 7,000 who have not bowed their knee to Baal. Meaning what? Meaning the bride chooses. Now let's wrap this up. What does that mean? In order to draw the gaze of the intensification of all power in the universe, as a groom, the bride needed to show herself to be the light. That opportunity was given during the wilderness season, in which there were only two that survived that curse, and that was Joshua and Caleb. And they just so happened to be the ones who also said, we could have gone into the promised land. Okay? Yahweh will always preserve a remnant. But now here is the part that is important, and this is the part that is imperative to our understanding. And that is that the intensification of all power in the universe, as a groom, needs a sovereign choice from his bride, not a biased one. I learned this actually through a very interesting experience of granting freebies to unfortunate people. I provided a job and a home to an individual. I gave them free food. I gave them an opportunity to earn. I gave them an opportunity to be clean and to be educated in all that I knew. And I could tell you I gave it all for free, and I was warned by my mentor to never do this, and I did it anyways. The reason I did is because of the compassion I had that was unfortunately, more biased towards the realm of mercy than it was justice. You need to be careful. And let me let me make something abundantly clear. Before you make a judgment like this, fear God, because he will totally reciprocate what I'm about to say. You be clear that you are not interfering with the discipline of God when you hand something out. There are sometimes reasons that people are in the bad state that they are in, and careful that you don't deliver them lest that come back upon you. But now understand, you be very careful with that determination. You be very, very careful that the Ruach is not instructing you to take care of that person. Do you know that After His Heart Ministries actually helped a conman for about 3 to 4 years, I believe it was? A con man. Somebody who I knew was a liar and a manipulator and had probably swindled thousands of people. We cared for in the last days of his life. He's passed now. He was a liar. He was absolutely a manipulator. But we cared for him because the Spirit told us to. The Ruach told us to that he would finish strong within our covering. That requires deep discernment from the Spirit, doesn't it? Because most people would look at a con man and say, that guy's not going to get any of my money. In fact, I have people who have left this congregation who say, well, he doesn't actually provide for himself. He doesn't have a job, and therefore he should not be receiving any of my money. When truth be told, they were actually refusing the ministry the money, not me, because they weren't paying me directly. I would get a paycheck from the ministry. That's the discernment that you need to have. That's the carefulness you need to have with this, because it will totally reciprocate on you. In fact, I'm sure there are things that are bad in my life right now that have reciprocated on me because of my choice to judge somebody a certain way and not provide them with the light. But I can tell you that it is absolutely imperative for you to understand that there are times where there needs to be just a letting or an allowing or a flowing of discipline upon a person. But I was leaning more to chesed, and I can tell you that the result was that there really wasn't a feeling within the person that they had actually earned what they were receiving. And it turned into a big old mess and eventually a betrayal and a whole bunch of other things. But I can tell you, I learned my lesson about freebies. But I also understand that doesn't necessarily make it the black and white. It's just a dynamic that ebbs and flows. So now I think you can understand that the bride draws the gaze of the groom through an earning of the light. The intensification of all power in the universe's gaze is drawn, and he says, okay, I will, now that I see you're willing to earn, I will make a conditional covenant. If you're obedient to my Torah, Deuteronomy 28, all of this applies to you. You will be my queen. You will see the dew of heaven that I granted to Jacob. But if you don't, every bad thing you can imagine will fall upon you. However, interestingly enough, I'm not the one that's going to do it. You'll do it to yourself because you know you're supposed to be the queen. You know you're supposed to be obedient. Remember, the dragon doesn't care. Who is the dragon? The accuser of the brethren, that serpent of old that manipulated Eve. And whether we accept that there was an actual entity that manipulated Eve, or we accept that she actually was within her mind doing these things, and Adam was within his mind doing these things, which is what James seems to propose, that we are led away of our own lusts, then we can identify, especially in John, 1 John, I think it is, says that all that is in the world is the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, which are contained within her observations of the fruit. Good for food. desirable to make one wise, and pleasing to the eyes. Right? The world, the field, right there in front of her. So who concluded those things? But let's just say, the serpent of old, the dragon, is attracted, very important, the dragon goes after or is attracted to, for the sake of persecuting those who have the testimony of Yeshua, which I just gave to you in depth today. I just gave to you in deep understanding today, and the commandments of God. So free light, earned light. Free light, earned light. Free light as in elevation, earned light as in what? Raising the entire energy through being the queen of heaven, as it were. And I'm careful with that word because there's actually some complaints in the prophets about the queen of heaven. Anyways, the point being is that now you understand she actually is designed to be rebellious so that she would choose without any bias towards the benefits of his benevolence. Oh, how beautiful is that? How beautiful is that? He made it so that she could not be a gold digger. That's beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love my God because of those type of things. He made it in such a way that we would only be able to receive, and not of our own merit, and not of our own, and not of any bias towards what he would do for us. Because truth be told, is in this world of suffering, that is few and far between, that there would be a level of benefit so influential that you would choose to be obedient over being disobedient. But we are in a realm where that is not the case. We are in a realm where disobedience is the norm. And Yeshua took care of that, but still disobedience is the norm. But what is crazy is that as he says, you will receive all these things if you are obedient. If you're disobedient, all these things will happen. He says in James, God doesn't tempt you, nor is he tempted. Meaning what? All that will fall upon you. And that being what? The accuser of the brethren will fall upon you because you are disobedient. You need to understand, your obedience does not draw down the light. You are the light, and all of the mirroring of the Omer is actually who you really are. Your hindrance of that is your wounds, your entitlements, your living beliefs, your lack of imagination, and your ideal theology that you think that God is out here when he's actually right here. What preciousness is in that choice then? Because this realm is 99% darkness. Your ability to correct it, your willingness to correct it, is actually your willingness to receive the light. And if you receive the light, then you receive provision, protection, and instruction, which means you're not the one who makes the money. Will you go earn it? Yes, of course. That's a system that unfortunately is in place at this time. You either are the owner or you're the wage earner. And if you're the wage earner, you earn it. If you're the owner, then you use the wage earners to earn it. And that's just how it works. And I'm not necessarily saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that that is the system. You go and quote unquote earn your money. But I promise you, and this is important, when Yeshua said, take no thought for what you will wear, what you will eat, what you will drink, you need to know your shelter, your food, your heat, your coolness, all of the things that exist as the necessities to have life are not yours to provide. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean you just go quit your job. What it means is you understand where it's actually coming from, and so you stop being afraid of the sick days. And you stop being afraid of the Sabbaths. And you stop being afraid of the things that would make you destitute. Because you're only going to be destitute if you're disobedient to Torah, according to Deuteronomy 28. And that's only going to happen as a result of your guilt and therefore your imagination about the bad things that should happen. That doesn't exclude the fact that every single last human being besides you doesn't know this. And not only that, but is most likely a weak mind, all 8 billion of them, who does not want to choose the right thing during the wilderness season. Doesn't want to elevate, doesn't want this spiritual high. They want this. They want to create their own God. They want to have a full belly. They want to experience the glory of the physical realm and ignore the spiritual. No wonder this dips. It is very important in this whole process for you to realize that you are the reason for everything. Remember, it said, okay, let's see if I can very quickly illustrate this because we need to wrap up. The sun, moon, and stars dictate the years, the days, the Moedim or feast days, and the signs in the heavens, right? Okay, so now the sun, moon, and stars now become the governor of the months, right? The moon in its phases becomes the months or the moons, right? And then contained within those, the rising and the falling of the sun and the circaheptane rhythms equate to the weeks, okay? Every seventh day is a Shabbat. According to Yeshua, the Shabbat was actually made for man, not meant for the Shabbat. What? The sun, moon, and stars and circaheptane rhythms and rests and all of the in-betweens of the cycles were made for you. The entire cycle of the universe was made for you. And if that be true, then we need to accept that we can bask in that energy. And that energy as advantageous to us, not a hindrance to us. Don't get me wrong. Contractive energies can get very uncomfortable because we are used to an expansive universe. But have you realized by now that if you humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, He will raise you up to a place of honor? Let's read that just really quick, just for memory's sake. In James chapter 4, starting in verse 7. Submit to the authority of God. Resist the devil and stand firm against him, and he will flee from you. Come close to God with a contrite heart, and he will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your unfaithful hearts, you double-minded people. Be miserable and grieve and weep over your sin. Let your foolish laughter be turned into mourning and your reckless joy to gloom. Humble yourselves with an attitude of repentance and insignificance in the presence of Yahweh, and He will exalt you. He will lift you up and give you purpose. Man, I love the Amplified Bible when it comes to some of these verses. Don't get me wrong, I know I'm not swearing by the Amplified Bible. It's still English and it's still garbage. But because unless you know the Hebrew and you accept that the New Testament was not written in Greek, you will not know that the things that were actually written here. But if I say this is close enough to the spirit of what this is actually trying to say, which is, if you become like Yeshua and get under, you will be given all things. You could never actually do what Yeshua did, because just like you can never be the 100% light, you can never be 100% darkness, but Yeshua can. He can choose that. So let's recap just real quick, real simple. You are the bride, which is the last of the light. You have only one choice, and that is to receive or rebel. That's it. Receiving provision, protection, and instruction requires you to surrender your ability to do just that. Provide for yourself, protect yourself, and instruct yourself. The instruction given from heaven is simple. I have a desire to bestow all of my benevolence upon something, but I need that something to choose me directly. That something cannot be biased in any way towards any of the benefits of my benevolence. In other words, my benevolence is concealed, and all they will know is rebellion, except for 1% of them, which is actually me giving them that instruction, but also me activating that within them. And that will make them the most powerful being in that realm, because that realm is all darkness, which means everything around us in this height, width, depth, time realm, and all the 7 heavens above us and whatever's below us is under our feet, according to Psalm 8. And it is very important for you to understand that if that be true, then the daughter of heaven is actually the bride of heaven, is actually the queen of heaven, and therefore is sovereign even above the intensification and all power in the universe itself, in that she can say no to him. And that's it. Everything else is either equal or he is sovereign. But it's very important for you to know that that no creates that last void that Yeshua is in. When we accept the light, we elevate this realm. We elevate each other, because the majority of us don't even know that we are Elohim. A majority of us don't even know about Omer. Man, you try to mention Omer to a Christian and their lid pops off. The majority of the time, I can tell you, I mean, I have gone, for example, I've gone at times and had, like, for example, it was Tabernacles. And I was very excited about Tabernacles. We had just purchased the ministry tent, which consequently is a beautiful, large tent that not only can provide an element of warmth if it works correctly, and then it can provide shade, it can provide shelter from the rain or whatever. We can use it in so many ways. I was so excited about it. And it was Tabernacles, so it's tents, right? And there was this Gentile, uncircumcised Philistine Christian who consequently was the negation particle in some of my public ministry when I first began, is in a position now in which we interact and kind of are forced to be in interaction with each other. And I mentioned the fact that he has the camper shell on his truck. As I encountered him during the day, I encounter him and am communicating with him, and I just mentioned, hey, dude, you're going camping this weekend? Yep. Do you know what this is? I was so excited. And I said, it's Tabernacles, man. Now, in my mind, that's Christmas, right? The birth of Christ, all the power behind the signs in the heavens and all that stuff. And he says, oh, is that Jewish stuff? Yeah, that's what you got coming. If you become one of my replacements, that's what you have coming. But I could tell you, the cycles were made for Adam, not Adam for the cycles, and therefore he's Lord of them. And if that be true, then him choosing to receive provision, protection, instruction, to receive the light, elevates this realm. Elevates this realm. And truth be told, there are a number of people out there in the world who have become so much of a master in this that they actually maintain the existence of humanity. Don't believe me, find out for yourself. But I can tell you, you might meet one in your lifetime, and you will conclude that they are actually the reason that this world still exists, because they choose to continue to get under it. They choose to continue to use the energies to elevate it instead of judging it and determining that it's unworthy, because this whole thing is the bride. So who is she to you? Is she unworthy, or should we elevate her? Should we bring that persona of the bride up and present it before the bridegroom